Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to give a few more moments as people trickle in. Hi again. Thank you all for joining us today. We are very delighted to have you all here and to have a conversation about allyship in the workplace. My name is Lanise Beavers, class of 2018, and I will be moderating today's panel. This past year, there's been more of a collective invested interest in how racism, white supremacy, and racial bias shows up in all of our spaces. And with dealing with multiple pandemics, COVID-19, and the public murders of Black folks, while working from home and dealing with socio-political strife and the hyper-focus on racial justice and equity, many of us have had to actively confront the roles that we play in these systems. We hope that today's conversation will help sprout new ideas of what it means to support BIPOC in the workplace. We hope to leave guests with various ideas about how anti-racism work can be tackled, that allyship is an action. We also hope to show that activism is a continuous effort and goes beyond the past year, how embedded racism is in all of our structures, as well as give some language to all of you to understand and describe the things that you may be experiencing, feeling, seeing in the workplace. And lastly, understand that there are multiple lanes on the highway of creating a more equitable and just world. But before we dive deep into today's conversation, we first want to acknowledge and give a moment of silence for what today is, which is the anniversary of George Floyd's passing. If we could all just take a moment of silence in his honor, that would be great. Thank you all for sharing that moment with us. I'm excited for the panelists to introduce themselves. They're all amazing in their own right and actively engage in allyship in various ways. I'll first start off with Mel. If you could introduce yourself and tell us who you are, that would be great.
Hi, thank you, Lanise. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I've done a couple of these panels now, and to be able to see some really familiar faces is super exciting, but then also to see new faces is great as well. So I graduated class of 2005, and since leaving Kenyon, I've had multiple roles where I've either officially been in the HR space or have supported HR or human resources functions. And I'm really excited about being able to speak to this topic specifically. I'm currently the director of human resources for BuyerLink. I'm in Philadelphia right now, and I'm moving back to California on Friday. So I'm in the midst of transitioning right now, but I wouldn't have missed this for the world. Looking forward to it.
Thanks for sharing that with us, Mel. Dave, how about you introduce yourself next?
Thanks, Lanise. My name is Dave Hanson. I'm class of '87 at Kenyon. After Kenyon, I was a substitute teacher and wrote for a newspaper. Then I went to law school. I've been an attorney for like 28 years now. My first job out of law school was working in prison for the public defender's office. I went into private practice for a while. A couple years ago, I had a midlife crisis, got out of private practice, and I'm back in prison right now because it dawned on me that I'm not good at much, but I'm good at speaking with inmates. I guess that's my short bio.
And what about you, Kevin?
Hi, I'm Kevin. I'm class of 2015. After Kenyon, I moved to St. Louis and did Teach for America, and then now I'm currently in Cleveland in medical school, and I'm a second-year med student here.
Yeah, thank you all for introducing yourselves to everyone here. The topic of allyship, specifically allyship to BIPOC colleagues, students, clients, patients, whoever you may interact with in your workplace, can be perceived as deep, loaded, and sometimes intimidating in 2021. What inspired you to be a part of this conversation and a part of this panel today?
I can go ahead and start. I this is my personal form of protest, right? As much as I can help educate people or be a part of helping to illuminate some things that people haven't necessarily experienced, is why I wanted to be a part of that. And if it changed just one person's perspective today, I will have done everything that I set out to do. So that's why I'm here. I think it's important.
Similarly, I'm here because I would like to make a difference. I am no expert in this area. I want to make that clear. And I'm also not, I work at the State Public Defender's Office here in Ohio, and I am not acting as an official spokesperson for the office. But the reason I'm here is what I talked about, I working in prison now. I love hearing people's stories. And that's what, whenever I talk to, I have, I've represented hundreds of clients in prison, and I always like to talk in the beginning of, when I talk to them, I say, what's your story? And they say, what do you mean? And I said, whatever you think it means, tell me something, give me something, to build a rapport before talking about their case. And I think that's, as I've gotten older and more experienced, the one thing I've realized is that being a listener and forging relationships with people is the goal with everything. And that's, I think, in my capacity, that's what I'm doing here.
And yeah, like similar to what David said, I don't consider myself an expert on this at all, but I wanted to be here because, I feel like I've, over the past few years, just by the virtue of being in the classroom, and now I find myself in a field that is trying to, catch up with, I guess, societal injustices, right? I feel like, the experience I've gained and could provide maybe a helpful voice to others who are maybe in similar fields and trying to figure out how to broach these conversations with colleagues and folks who are, trying to, be better allies towards whomever they're with.
I think it's necessary for all of us to acknowledge a couple things. One, I'm putting on my HR hat now. The comments and questions and things that are expressed in this call are based on our own specific experiences. We are not speaking on behalf of our companies, nor are we speaking on behalf of the school. And so have patience with us as we go through these questions and provide our perspectives. But again, these are our own personal experiences and perspectives, not of the school, nor of the companies we work with or represent.
Thanks for stating that, Mel.
Especially since it's recorded, like we got to make sure.
I was wondering if you all could give an example or a story of allyship that has been impactful or meaningful in your workplace. It could either be something that you've witnessed or have engaged in personally.
Mine has to do with a gentleman who had been in prison for 34 years. I represented him at the Ohio Parole Board, and he got out. He has morphed into I consider a close friend. He lives in Cincinnati. I'm actually going to preside over his wedding after the whole COVID thing gets better, but he texts me at least every 3 weeks or so, and always at the right time. When I'm like feeling down or something. It's really weird. And but anyway, we talked. He liked to bring up the fact that, you know, we're the same age. He's African American. I'm a white lawyer, and he actually brought up, you know, that, wow, we're really close. This is cool. It's because we can communicate. We're on the same wavelength, sort of, right? And that doesn't happen all the time, obviously. And I think, I mean, that's my, and that's, and I'm the only reason I'm telling the story is because he texted me yesterday, and I told him I was going to be on this panel, and he thought that was pretty cool. So, but that's my quick one.
Yeah, you know, I think that back in it was maybe like last July or August, there were a couple residents over at the Cleveland Clinic who were trying to start this. There's this national working group called gosh, I'm blanking, White Coats for Black Lives. And the idea is that different like healthcare systems or chapters can create their own like entities and do, you know, healthcare equity projects in the cities they're in. And I thought it was cool that a couple of these residents were taking this up to do this in Cleveland. You know, I feel like that is a pretty big step for healthcare professionals to like acknowledge that, you know, we have these systemic issues, and we're going to do our best to try to get others on board in the Cleveland health system to take part. You know, in my head, it was something that, like I said, I know healthcare itself is playing catch up to society, but I thought it was really nice to see that there were people who were trying to, you know, make a difference in the communities, and, you know, and there were chapters all over the country who were doing the same thing. And so I do think it's great that I thought that was just a really great thing to kind of see and hear.
So I have two examples. I'll give an example of one where an ally did something for me, and then a time where I paid it forward. So I like to talk, I've told this story several times, and it's a great example of what allyship looks like in the classroom. I was told that Professor Jesse Matz is on the call, and so if he is, this goes out to you, buddy. So I took Jesse's intro to English class as a sophomore, and we had to write about our personal stories. And this was my first English level class that I'd ever taken. And there was some really personal stuff in my personal story that I just felt I needed to get out on paper. And Jesse didn't grade the paper. He wrote on there, he was like, come see me. So, and so what I loved about that was he said to me, he said, there's some personal things in this paper that I think are great that you expressed, but the composition of the paper needs some work. And so that spoke to me to say, this person understood kind of where I was coming from, growing up in Oakland, not having had experience with collegiate level language courses. And so he allowed me to rewrite, like he allowed me to redo my assignments whenever there was great opportunity for getting a better grade. And while that was double the work I did, he saw that there was an opportunity to leverage, to allow me to be my best self. And I always remember that. So Jesse, great job. And so I say that to all the professors on this call, that you can be an ally in the workplace and in the classroom, especially for students who are first generation or non-native English speakers. There's a lot of opportunity to do that. And so one of the things that I did that was kind of one of the sort of cornerstones of why I do what I do, we were launching a new 401k plan in one of the companies that I worked for, and being the HR leader, I was responsible for that. And one of the employees asked if we had I think it's just pronounced Sharia or Sharia compliant funds, where those who are, some Muslim people are only allowed to participate in 401ks if we have like halal or Sharia compliant investment funds. And him asking me that led me to do two things. One, I had to change our entire program to look for a bank that would work with us that had these compliant funds for this employee to be able to participate. That then caused me to go and explain to my leaders that, hey, I'm thinking about moving our program. Can we do this for our employees? Because there were several others that I know he was the spokesperson for. And while it took a little extra work and some convincing, we were allowed to do that. And then we were able to offer that from that point going forward. And so allyship is action, like Lanise spoke about earlier in the call. And what I'm really proud of that moment was being an ally is work, and it's difficult. And especially if you're not comfortable with sticking your neck out there for things or people or anything like that, the action piece is what's most important. And what Jesse did for me, what I did for our employee, it takes just being empathetic of a person's situation and moving forward and taking that action.
Yeah, I think you all hit the nail right on the head, just thinking about allyship being a verb and being that action, but also sort of like staying in various lanes on the highway when it comes to allyship and figuring out what works best for you to engage in that verb. So I have another question on the opposite end of that. Can you give us an example of allyship gone wrong? What would you do differently or suggest the actors involved to do differently?
I can't tell the whole story because it would involve me saying things, but I think I'm going to defer this to Mel here in a second, because I know we talked about her mentioning this question, but I think as a white guy, I think the allyship gone wrong thing is when white people think they know what's best and try to help situations without realizing that they kind of forgot to actually have a real conversation with the person that they're trying to help. So I realize that's vague and amorphous, but that's kind of what I'm on the lookout for, just in my role as who I am, is again, it's all listening, relationships, and talking with people, and knowing that my experience is different and I don't know what's going on.
The most recent experiences that I've seen, both in the workplace and all across social media, is when a person of power or privilege, whether that's someone who it's by ethnicity or whether it's class or what have you, what I've seen so far is that when someone attempts to be an ally and sort of like speaks for an entire group of people, and then when they're called out on something, they like get defensive and upset, and then they just like, well, forget it then. It's like, no, this is hard work, and if you're willing to help, you have to be willing to make a mistake and be called out on it. And I think this work is not for the faint of heart, and it's not easy. But I think it's absolutely necessary. And so another example of allyship going wrong is, and then I'll give you a workplace example where one of our leaders, and I'm not talking about the current company that I'm working for, but one of our leaders assumed that pregnant women wouldn't want to have harder, more demanding jobs because they would be too tired from taking care of their children. And I got the intent or the intent of what he was trying to say, but it was just all wrong. And having to have the conversation of how that could be determined to be discriminatory. Luckily, he was open to the conversation, but I think understanding our own biases first will help prevent making those kinds of mistakes. And so tip number one, know your own bias, or understand your own biases and prejudices that exist.
Yeah, the example I think of is, last summer after the George Floyd incident, right? Social media was popping, right? And for a few weeks, people were jumping on and seemingly joining this racial equity fight. And then once the summer went away, those people went away. The social media posts went away. Even what were people posting, like the black boxes, even something as small as that, like, went away. And as we kind of segue into the school year, I think in medicine, a lot of people kind of forget that this is a field for privileged individuals. It's almost, it's predominantly white and Asian. 80% of individuals come from the top 50% of the socioeconomic status in this country. I'm sorry, I'm blanking my words. So basically, you're wealthy and you're rich and you're wealthy and you're white and you're Asian. And I think oftentimes people don't consider that their words can still be really hurtful. And that is part of being an ally. And so there was this incident where, we were all talking about board studying. This was back in the fall, and a bunch of my classmates were making these comments that we're all in this together, and we're all we all have the same goal, and we're all gonna we're all there together. And there's an incident where it actually began when one of my white classmates called one of our black classmates a snake for seemingly like they thought they were just snooping on our class group me, and it kind of just like, you should do that. But then they started, then the comments about we're all in this together. Well, yeah, we are in this together, but it can be triggering to someone if you don't have the same means, right? The reality is in academics and STEM, right? If you are not white or Asian, your academic outcomes are lower. You got less resources generally, and so these comments can be triggering to individuals who don't have access to the same material that the more privileged individuals do. And so it ended up being this really actually like awful time where there was a lot of, animosity amongst my classmates. And part of it was, well, like, yeah, it's because people kind of just forgot that being an ally is a constant thing. It's not just showing up to a rally and then, and then going home about it. It's in everything you do. It's like I said, it's in those really in those comments that might be innocuous, but they can be hurtful. If you're saying, we're all going to pass boards. Well, once again, boards are $600, buying the textbooks and everything. It's like, it's hundreds of dollars. That's just, it's just, we're not the same. We're not in the same boat. We're just in the same race, right? But it was just a reminder, and I kind of hope that my classmates walked away from that experience just realizing that, like I said, words can really make a difference in someone, and being an ally can just be something as little as just being supportive, as opposed to saying really broad statements that really aren't true.
Yeah, I think what you all said is really important, thinking about how our actions and our words are essentially rooted in the biases that we hold, and just thinking about how can we move forward from those, from our negative biases, and sort of like rewire our brain to make an impact on each other's lives. In recent years, we've seen an emergence of DEI-specific roles in the workplace. Sometimes what that means is that there's a very small team of people who take a brunt of this labor in regards to DEI work. How can someone be an ally when it's not a part of their job description?
Jump on this as the HR lady on call. So there's one of the issues that I've seen with this influx of DE&I roles is that they take the token Black person, the token woman, or the token person of color and plop them in the role and expect them to make magic happen. And really, that's not how it works. So I'll get to the second, the actual meat of the question in a little bit, but I just want to be very clear that just plopping someone in a role without support, without the funds, without the sponsorship by the leadership or executive team, or, you know, if it's in a college of the provost or the president, is literally pointless. And I say that because this work is emotionally laborious, and it's really, really hard to get people to rally behind ideas that have no backing, no support, no financial support. And so I tend to shy away from those kinds of roles or companies that, you know, talk the talk that we have this great culture, we have a DEI program. And it's like, all right, show me the bottom line where you actually put money and people behind the effort. And so, excuse me, I'm getting a little excited because I get so passionate about this thing because I've seen it work and I've seen it fail miserably. So for people who are questioning of how to be an ally in the workplace or wherever you are, right, on the street, in the store, where we've seen these situations where people are being accosted by Karens, right, who just go around and terrorizing people. And so the way I like to think of it as, are you able to empathize? Right? Are you able to take yourself out of yourself and sit in someone else's seat or shoes and understand the experience that they're having? And since you, the person of privilege, like I serve as an ally for people who I have the privilege of being bilingual and going into store, I usually shop in primarily Asian and Mexican grocery stores. But when I go to like the Wegmans or whatever, and I see a family that's struggling with communicating the need, and I've done this in a doctor's office as well, being able to speak up, to empathize and understand, like, how would I feel if I didn't know how to communicate something really complex in a second language, right? So I take myself out of myself and sit in the shoes and the experience with those people, or the person for whom I'm serving as an ally, and then take action, right? Are you able to empathize and then take action? And a lot of the times it's not this big grandiose gesture. It's really just, how can I support you right now? It's being a cheerleader to someone in a meeting, co-signing with someone when they bring up a good idea in a meeting or something. Like it's really not these big gestures. Sometimes all it takes is, hey, that was a shitty experience. I heard that, I saw that, I observed that. And being able to sit in that restlessness or sit in that discomfort with a person, and then helping to see, if you come from a place of privilege in whatever the situation may be, taking some action.
Yeah, I kind of have to agree with Mel on the fact that I do feel like with these new roles, they kind of feel more like a cop out for the larger issue. I mean, they are cop outs, right? It's kind of like when companies hire like a wellness person, right? When reality people just want more time off, or like higher pay, right? Just give them that money. And that's how I kind of feel with hiring DEI specific roles. And, I think about my school for the past year, they, our DEI person and they really tried, or the team tried, but it's just really hard when the only way you're teaching DEI is just pumping out online modules for people. Like, do you really think people are really gonna like follow along or care about it? Maybe you can just flip through the slides in half an hour. Like, probably not. And I think that it's important to realize that, like Mel was saying, like being an ally is kind of like a constant thing. It is the little things, and for me, it's just about if I'm in class something, I'll just kind of, if there's, for example, I think about like last year they were showing us some video. It was some like marketing video for the Cleveland Clinic, and they were interviewing all their higher ups and everything, and and it's kind of just like, well, everyone in this video is white, like all the administrators are white, and it was just and so I feel like maybe making those comments aren't helpful to anyone, but I think just bringing up the awareness and hearing my colleagues like, oh, well, yeah, you're right, that is kind of a problem, actually. We didn't realize it at first. And I think it's just, like I said, those little things that can just strike up a conversation. And once again, this is, I think, being an ally, I think it's just, I think it's a conversation game, right? If you don't have the conversation, you really aren't going to get anywhere. And I think just being able to get in those conversations with people is just a really big step for a lot of people who aren't familiar with the space or uncomfortable. And people want to get into that, maybe want to try to get to this, but they don't know how. And I think just bringing them in any way, like I said, with conversations like that can I think really get them invested. And I think it'll do a lot more than just hiring one individual to like I said, pump out like stuff like that. So
I've got nothing to add to what Kevin and Mel just said. That was really well put. I love that about the ability to feel, to empathize, and then try to help out in different situations. That's the thing.
I have a question for you, Dave, actually. One of the things that I've noticed about you is that you're an active listener and you're able to form relationships with people regardless of the intersections of their identities. And I was wondering, how does relationship building impact your allyship?
I think that's the whole thing, actually, Lanise. And I realized that, especially, I'm 56 years old, so it's not like I'm super old, but I've been on the planet long enough, I think, to learn from experience. And one thing that I've learned that is a big part of me is that part of my privilege, and this sounds pretty simple, but part of my privilege is that I have the ability to be myself, to be genuine. I don't have to act or do anything. And we were talking about this on the phone, with one of the book I read at Kenyon, Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, is all about that. The ability to try to be yourself. And that's been my number one goal, is to try to be genuine with people, and starting relationships, and then being a listener, especially with my clients, who they're sit down at the table across from me and we don't have much in common. So that's why I get into the whole thing about telling me a story, or I try to make them laugh. I ask them if they like dogs, or I'll show them a picture or something. And I think that goes a long way. And similarly with, I guess this is a different question, but like with, dealing with white colleagues, it's kind of the same thing. You want to listen, meet them somewhere, and then discuss things and make sure that you talk about as much as you can. But that's the whole thing is communication, listening, and relationships, I think, for everything.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think something that sometimes gets left out of the conversation about allyship is remembering that we are all humans and we're all people, and that sometimes we forget to communicate and to have larger conversations, not only about ourselves, but about our actions in general. Kevin, I have a question for you. There's been a lot of scholarship and conversations about constructions of a model minority. As an Asian American, how have you contended with the quote unquote positive stereotypes, especially since you are in medicine, and understanding that there are many quote unquote positive stereotypes about Asian folks within medicine? And how does this affect your standpoint as an ally?
Yeah, that's a tough question. And it's something that, and I've first I've always said that, like if there was someone who looked like my patients who could take my spot and be in this field, I'd much rather have them here, right? Like Cleveland is 50% Black. If my Black patients had a Black doctor, they should take my spot. Like that's perfectly fine with me. But the reality is with how our educational system is structured, right? We kind of, it sucks. And I feel like the thing that I tried at least taking up is that because of my privilege and because I'm in this middle ground, right? I think it's important that at least for this moment, until we can fix the educational pipeline into medicine, that I provide a voice for those, just because I've been able to. And I think, I do consider that I myself be lucky to have experiences working with underrepresented minorities, and so it's important for me to kind of leverage my privilege in that sense. But on the flip side, it's tough to be viewed as an ally, especially when, like I said, when you're in this kind of middle area. I've had white colleagues not even consider me to be a person of color. At my last job, it was me and my other colleague was Asian, and one of our other colleagues kept saying that, well, she's white and she's not white, she's Filipino. Like they're two very, very, very different things. And so I'm always trying to grapple that, where I feel like people view me as being in the dominant, whatever the dominant majority in. And part of that is, people have seen Asian Americans kind of assimilate into white culture. But I think it's important that I think people view Asians as allies. I mean, the fight for racial equity in this country is built upon the shoulders of Black, Asian, Brown activists, and it's important to acknowledge that we have a history of working together, and in that racial equity won't be attained until everyone kind of views that. The example I like to give, and this actually makes me really happy, was from my parents. A few weeks ago, my parents went to like an anti-Asian hate rally or whatever in Cincinnati, and my mom made this comment to me afterwards. She's like, I think, I feel like, Dad and I were talking, and we feel like we should start going to other rallies because there were other groups of people there supporting us, and it's really important that we also are out there supporting other groups, whether it's like Black Lives Matter rallies or other stuff, and they're really happy. And it was kind of just like, I'm glad my parents are recognizing that this is it's not like Blacks versus Asians versus Browns, boy, it's everyone against racism, right? And but yeah, and I like I said, I hopefully one day everyone will start to view Asians as part of this, as part of being an ally. And obviously there are Asians who aren't, who are hurting that, but I generally think that it's important that we are recognized as allies in this fight.
Yeah, you're definitely right. We all need to lift each other up, and stay within solidarity with one another, because white supremacy has it out for all of us. Mel, the next question is for you. Now that work is becoming more remote, how has allyship shifted or changed, and what new challenges and opportunities have you seen emerge?
Okay, so great question. Last year, when everybody's offices went dark in March, that presented a very unique opportunity for companies to flex and be agile. And as a mom who has a 2-year-old at the house, expecting to be able to fully participate and be my full productive professional self was unrealistic. And being an ally in the workplace during that time, I remember my manager, who was the chief talent officer, she said, Mel, I have a kid at home too. If you need to rework your schedule, you tell me what you need and we'll do it. And I remember thinking, if I take advantage of this, right, will she judge me based on my productivity? Like, will my professionalism be questioned because I have to take time away from my family during work hours to be able to take care of my kid and put him to take a nap? And I remember thinking that, but then also I remember thinking, I'm a mom first. This job is secondary to my family and the well-being of my son. And so I stood proudly in that. I took advantage of the opportunity to, reduce my schedule to half time. I made sure that I showed up when I showed up and showed up well and performed well, but I did take the time that I needed. Now, I was very fortunate and privileged to work for a company where that was okay. And what companies are now realizing, right, with the opening up of everything, that one, remote work works, right? And now there's no real justification for forcing people to come back into the office. And I think as people are starting to be more intentional about their self-care and seeing that, yes, I can be a fully functioning professional at home while working, people are taking ownership of their own work experience, right? So the work experience has shifted to, it's a seller's market now, right? So the talent is dictating what they want, and companies are now having to shift to that. And so companies who don't plan on being flexible in that way are going to see talent either leaving, or they're not going to be able to attract the high quality talent, just because people are recognizing that I don't have to be in the office, or I don't have to work 60 hours a week to be, successful. And so I don't know if that's happening at Kenyon at all, but the industries and the workforces, the companies are shifting to be more flexible to meet people where they are. And I'm here for it. I love it.
I'm here for it too. There's still a lot of fear in engaging in conversations about racial allyship. There are people who want to learn and want to engage, but maybe they're afraid of saying something wrong or offending someone. We all know that people are afraid of being canceled, right? What would you say to someone who is sitting out of the conversations about active allyship or being an active ally because of the fear of being called out?
Well, this is kind of trite, my response, and I'll keep it short. But yeah, I mean, that's obviously big in the white community, and I guess other than get over it, get in the conversation, get over yourself. And I could go on and on about, how infuriating it can be when other white people talk about being colorblind, they don't see race and everything. And I think that's probably a good chunk of the crowd, at least from the white end, that doesn't want to get into the discussions. And they feel afraid and they feel resentment. I mean, this gets really complicated, obviously, but my quick short answer is to get over it. Get in the discussion. You're not doing anybody any favors by pouting.
Thanks for saying that, Dave, because I can't say that as a Black woman too. Thank you for saying that. I laugh because I'm not laughing because I'm poking fun at it. I'm laughing because I've had so many people who have said, I'm scared to say the wrong thing. And that's a parallel to, I don't want to ask questions because I don't want to seem dumb. And as professors, and managers, we all know that that's a myth, right? So last summer, after the George Floyd, I'll tell this quick story, but last summer after the George Floyd situation, I went to my manager and I said, as a Black female, George Floyd could have been my husband or my uncle or somebody in my family. And I carry that visual of the tape keep running. I carry that with me to work. Like, I don't drop all that once I come to work, right? And so I think for all of us in this company, I think we need to give space for people to be able to just talk about how they feel about what's happening, what's going on. And I hosted a series of 14 focus groups where I invited the entire company. People could sign up. It's like 10 people each group, so that they can have an intimate enough conversation to be able to just let the workers of color, the Black people specifically, to just say how they feel about what's happening, because we could see the morale of our Black coworkers just that whole time was just diminished. And basically, I started the conversation with, hey, this is a space for people to be able to express how they feel, whether it's a person of color who's expressing fear and anger and disgust, or if it's a white person who wants to hear it and understand and empathize with the people who are in this room. Feel free to ask questions. Don't be afraid to say something wrong. This is just a space to be able to talk about it. And the feedback that I got from the executive team who joined, from the employees who joined, felt that is what they needed, just to be able to talk about it free of judgment. Now, the things that happened that were put into place after that were phenomenal, but that was the tipping point, right? It's being able to speak freely about what the situation was, but then also hear and empathizing with other people on the call. So when you show up to work and your performance is impacted because all of this is going on, it's important to know that your coworker is probably dealing with a lot of stuff. And understanding that allows you to give that person more grace, or to ask questions, or to provide support in ways that you wouldn't have normally have done. Another thing that I saw, and this will be the last thing I say, was people, my white coworkers were more comfortable to say, well, how can I address this with a grandmother or an aunt or an uncle or somebody who says insensitive things? And I would say to everybody on this call is, whatever your personal form of protest is, if it's calling your uncle who says something super racist and just holding him accountable for it, or going to a protest, or whatever that is, calling it out is the first. Recognizing that it happens is the first thing. What you do after that, or what the other person feels after that, is not your fault, right? But you, as the owner, right, of the words that you say, calling something out and taking that action is what you can do. And how other people take it on is not really your responsibility.
Kevin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was trying to think of how to condense what I wanted to say. Yeah, I guess, I think I first, Dave, thanks for saying that. It brings up, so last summer, I think similarly to what Mel did, I ran this, I don't know, like this impromptu, I don't even to call it. It was like, I don't know, like a reading series that had people come and talk about different issues. And I remember at the very beginning, a couple of my friends made the comment that they didn't want to take part in it because they wanted to talk about this in a safe space with like really like with like loved ones, or they wanted to hear like, you know, hear it straight from people who've experienced racism. And it was one of those things where it's like, and I was thinking, and it made me really angry, because it was like, well, if you're talking about it, they're just like your family and your close friends, you're not gonna learn. Like, let's be real here. Like, your thoughts are gonna be in this little bubble, and also like knowing people, you're not gonna just walk out there and learn from random people in the street how they've experienced racism. And so this is not to say that what I was doing was the best way to do it, but it was, at least a space to talk about these issues, which generally people don't have those spaces to talk about. And thinking back to what Dave said, I wish I just said, like, get over it. I ended up just like getting really angry and just not talking with my friends for a little bit, because it was still frustrating to like to have to cop out that way. And yeah, and I think it's tough. I think people are, generally, and this is what I've kind of learned also, especially recently with what was going on with, at least in Atlanta, it took a lot, like, it took a lot from me basically like kind of being like, hey, yeah, like my friends, like to my friends, like, hey, that could have been like my mom or my sister who was shot. Like, my mom used to work in she used to work in like a restaurant, not to say that's the same salon, but it's just something that, it's like that, it's like that could have been my mom. And it didn't occur to my friends that this was a problem. And then when I brought it up, it was kind of like, oh, like, like, how can we help? And, helping it's more about just kind of, I don't even know, there's something you can help me, like, I'm fine, but like just being aware of the issues, I don't know, taking, caring about these things, which you say you care about on a daily basis. And that wasn't a great answer, but I think that it kind of, I think, there were a lot of frustrations with, I feel like, with people wanting to get in the space, but like peripherally, they don't want to put in the work. They want to just kind of jump in when the work has been done for them.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing those things. As we have a few minutes left, I wanted to see if you all could share one thing you want the audience to take away from this.
I mean, I'd probably just say it's, I kind of have fun being like a rabble rouser in spaces where I don't think it's like really appropriate to be a rabble rouser. But I will, I think that, kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You don't have to have, to be paid to do this work. It should be something that you do every day. And, I was never paid for anything I did. I just I got lucky that TFA provided those experiences, and, it kind of gave me enough, I guess, skills or experiences to have these conversations with people. And I mean, it's tough. It's not been easy to kind of to be involved in those type of conversations, but I think it's something that if you want to get involved, it's getting in is the hard part, but once you're in, it's just putting in the work daily is kind of like, I enjoy it. I think it's an enjoyable thing to learn. And I have to say that, like I said, if you want to get into it, I don't think it's something that you shouldn't be held back just because you think it's challenging.
I'll let Mel have the last word. And real briefly, it kind of riffing off what I'd said earlier, I think like the one thing as I've gotten older is I realize that the whole idea of saying you're colorblind is racial denialism, I think. And it's just hurtful, especially, it's hurtful. You can't form a relationship with somebody if you are saying, oh, I'm colorblind. I mean, that's kind of what, as a child of the 80s, that's like what the TV shows tried to teach you, is that, be colorblind. And when in fact, that being, quote, colorblind results in more racism, I think. And recognizing differences and being able to talk about those is the goal with everything. And thank you all. It's been a pleasure being here, and it was great to meet you, Lanise, and great to see Ted and Kevin and Mel again.
It's good to see you too. So I have a list of things now. I would say, if I could boil this down and distill like the real, the essence of what we're trying to say is, if you don't take anything away from today, I would ask that you take these couple things. When you are in conversations and having sort of these conversations where decisions are made, I would say to ask yourself who's not in the room, whose voice is not being represented. Because it's easy to fall into your own bubble and just make sure that you're okay. But I would highly suggest, research shows that diverse teams make better decisions, make the company more money, and have less, are less likely to make risky decisions. So ask who's not in the room, whether that's, and that's regardless if, you know, that person, that group is represented in the room or not. The second thing I would say is, you are inevitably going to make a mistake or say something wrong or stupid or something that somebody takes offense to. Just, you know, I would say take the feedback that you will get with grace, apologize, educate yourself, and move on. Like I said, this is hard, sticky, laborious work. And obviously you guys want to do something because you're on this panel. And so when you make a mistake or when you say something wrong, just know that, you know, apologize for it and move forward. And I say that with the caveat of understand what gaslighting is. Because a lot of what I've seen in the past is whenever someone makes a mistake, they put it back on the person who's giving that feedback that I didn't mean it that way. Or do you really think that he or she meant to say that? It's like, no. If someone is expressing to you something you said or did was offensive, then believe the person who's telling you that. And then the last thing I would say is seek out resources that will help educate you on these topics. Like I said, like we all said, we're not experts in this field. And so we can only give you what our own experiences are. But if you really want to learn and be an active ally, understand what your, like I said earlier, what your biases are and what your prejudices are, and then understand how to manage them because they won't go away, right? All of us have prejudices and biases, but understand how to manage them so they don't rear their ugly head in an unproductive way. And yeah, and then go forward, prosper. I would say if you can, if you see some, oh, last thing, sorry, I promise. If you hear or see something, say something, right? If you hear somebody say something messed up, say something about it. If you see someone actively being marginalized, say something, whether it's to the person who's doing the marginalizing or escalate it. Be a tattletale, that's okay. I say that because I'm usually the person who gets all the tattletaling and I have to do something about it. And so if you see or observe something, do something about it. Not doing anything perpetuates it. All right, I'm done.
Thank you all for sharing those last tidbits of knowledge. I want to thank you all for coming to this panel, and we're hopeful that you were able to take away some really great ideas and plans of action moving forward. I also want to give a special thanks to Ted Samuel for helping me coordinate this panel. And I hope everybody has a great Tuesday night or evening, wherever you are. And the rest of reunion weekend goes well.
Thank you. Thanks, Lanise.
Yeah, thanks for putting this together.
Hey, should we stay on as people drop? Okay.